Next, Marshall Goldman, senior scholar at the Davis Center for Russian Studies at Harvard University, recounts Russia's economic collapse in 1998 and its reemergence only a decade later as a financial force due to its energy wealth. The program, hosted by the Southern Center for International Studies in Atlanta, is 90 minutes.
Of course, it is a great honor for all of us to have Marshall Goldman be a guest here at the Southern Center for International Studies, a guest in Atlanta, and representing several wonderful institutions with which many of us have had relationships in the past over a wide range of subjects and interests and courses and whole degrees. And that is, Marshall, as you know, is an economist and is a professor at Wellesley College, but he's also a senior scholar and for many years the associate director of the Davis Center at Harvard University. That's a center that is really preeminent in studying over decades the developments in what was the Soviet Union and now the Russian Federation. So with that, Marshall, I'm very, very glad for you to be here. I would set this up. We are here to talk about Petrostate, the book, Petrostate, the idea, Petrostate, the practical and political entity that is moving forward. It's moving forward, of course, miraculously from its past, its especially most recent past. If any of us, I think, or except for maybe Mr. Putin himself, had thought what would happen after 1998 when the country was essentially bankrupt and under great challenge, people would have very much doubted that we would have this conversation here tonight, or the few that did see it coming or the possibilities are actually very, very few as far as I know. But I think being an historian, I have to at least say that I love the name because part of what we're intrigued about here is the Petrostate, and we know that it is a coined phrase, of course, coming from petroleum, but I think I have to suggest that since the first four letters are actually the Russian spelling of Peter the Great's name, that Petrostate has some perhaps meaning given the origins of some of the ideas, especially as it relates to the interaction with the West, with high technology, with great developmental issues that Peter the Great actually introduced in the country, or at least facilitated in many profound ways. It also is the first letters of the name of the city that figures prominently in this book and in the past of many of the prominent players that are major actors and players and leaders in the Petrostate, as Marshall has so wonderfully described it. One of the reviewers has said this is the book that is describing what has happened over this last decade, or really since the reemergence of Russia as this very significant energy powerhouse, and how that turns into political power and political action is the subject of the book, and then potential conversation and of course, what we will all see as things develop. But with that, I certainly welcome Marshall Goldman here, and it's a privilege to be on the same sort of stage with you.
Thanks, thanks very much, Wayne. I don't think you knew it, but you set me up when we were picking the title for the book. My agents had called it Petrostate, the first time I've ever had an agent. My wife said, no, people will think it means prostate, but it's, so that was not what Peter had in mind. And let me just say that it's a pleasure to be here, because this is the most exciting thing I've ever engaged in. And when I got this agent said, you know, you can't do this like your other books. Because, you know, then you assign them as a textbook, and you told the students there would be an exam, and so they had to read it. Today, you're not teaching anymore, you can't give exams, so you've got to make it so people want to read it. But I said, if I do that, I'll lose my license as an economist. And I said, what in the world can I write about that would make it exciting? But then a year ago, we went off. I was invited to go to Russia. There's this meeting called the Valdai Hills Group. And they take us out. In the end, the climax is always meeting with Putin. And this time, the third year that we were doing it, we've done it 4 years now. The third year, we were going to go out. The theme was oil, and so they took us out to Siberia, to the Priobskaya field. I said, well, maybe I'll find something there. And I got there, and it was very interesting. But to write about it, it would have been forced. But then they took us to Gazprom headquarters. And those of you who've been to Moscow know that Gazprom headquarters are really this tall building striking in the southwest region of Moscow. And so I'm going to do something that I hate it when other people do, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's to read from my own book, which describes going into this building. When I start reading, people say, why does he have to read it? He hasn't read it before. But you may get a flavor, and this really kind of sets off this whole change in atmosphere, and I think this describes it as much as anything can. At first, I was puzzled. Where were they taking us? For such a big, sleek glass Moscow high-rise, Gazprom's elevator in its headquarters building was tiny. 5 people could barely squeeze in. And its hall corridors were narrow, very narrow. This was, after all, the world's largest producer of natural gas, not to mention Russia's largest company. Following a short walk, we were ushered into a darkened, silent room where nothing seemed to be happening. Strange. It was only when all the members of our group had made their way up on those elevators that the room suddenly came alive. Then for a time I felt as if I'd wandered into a NASA Space Center. Or was it a James Bond movie set? All that was missing was that out-of-body voice intoning, "Welcome, Mr. Goldman. We were expecting you," if you've seen the James Bond. Okay, anyway, in front of me, covering the whole 100-foot wall of the room, was a map with a spider web-like maze of natural gas pipelines reaching from East Siberia west to the Atlantic and from the Arctic Ocean south to the Caspian and Black Seas. Manipulating this display were Gazprom dispatchers, 3 men controlling the flow of Gazprom's gas to East and West European consumers of this Russian natural gas monopoly. No wonder there was tight security. There was also a sense of self-assurance, as measured by the value of its corporate stock. By the summer of 2006, when we were there, Gazprom, and I know some of you have invested in it, this state-dominated joint stock corporation, and until 1992, it was actually the Soviet Ministry of the Gas Industry, had become the world's 3rd largest corporation. Only private shareholder-owned ExxonMobil and General Electric were larger. If you've been following it today, you know that actually it's number 2 now, because General Electric stock has fallen, and so it's the largest corporation in terms of capitalized value is ExxonMobil, and Gazprom is now number 2. And then one more sentence and I'm through. With a flick of a switch, those dispatchers sitting in this Moscow room could freeze and indeed have frozen entire countries. At the very least, they could send their citizens off in a panic in search of sweaters, scarves, and blankets. Well, for me, that sets the theme of this fascinating story. Less than 10 years ago, August 17th, 1998, Russia was effectively bankrupt. And you have tables in front of you, and if you look at them, the dark line...
Excuse me, this is where the economist comes in.
Well, don't fall asleep just yet, but if you look at the dark lines are GDP, and you can see what was happening from the early 90s, and indeed it begins in the late 80s. The Russian economy goes into a free fall. It drops in 1 year almost 16%. Cumulative by 1998, there's a slight uptick in 1997, but by 1998, the cumulative fall is about 40%. That's worse than what we suffered in the Great Depression. So you can I want you to get a feel of how bad the Russian economy was doing, how humiliated the Russians were, because from being a superpower country, they had fallen into not being significant at all. They were bankrupt, effectively bankrupt. And on August 17th, 1998, the Russian country, as a country, declared that its bonds were worthless. They would not redeem their bonds. The stock market in Russia fell. The currency, the ruble, became worthless. There was no money in the treasury. There were echoes in this country, because some of you may remember with